Chapter 4. Ellen watched the cart climb the path and disappear into the trees before heaving a sigh. Bill didn't know it, but he'd gotten lucky. The moray eel could have attacked him and spun him full torso into the fire coral, or he could have drowned. "You okay?" Autumn asked. Ellen glanced at her and faked a smile. "I'm okay, just concerned, that's all." "Not surprised," Russ said. "Bill's leg looked all torn up. He'll be okay, though." Russ wore a sad smile, but his eyes told the tale. He actually gave a shit. "Thank you, Russ," she said. "Welcome." He clapped his hands. "Snorkels? Masks? Flippers?" Angelo said, "Andale," and marched off to the racks, singing a song in Spanish. He had a beautiful voice. "I like him," Russ said, grinning. "Best valet we've ever had." "So far," Autumn said with a demure smile. "The week's not over yet, honey." "Quite true." Angelo returned with their gear and spread it on the beach. He then walked back to the racks and disappeared with a large beach towel. "Miss Autumn?" he said. "Here or further up the beach?" "It's fine, thanks," Autumn said. "You're not snorkeling with us?" Ellen asked. Autumn shook her head. "Going to sunbathe." She reached her hands behind her back and untied the string of her bikini top. It practically came apart in her hands, her tan-lined breasts spilling out. Ellen said. "What?" Autumn asked, stepping out of her bikini bottoms. She placed her clothes, such as they were, on the sand and lay on the beach blanket. "Oh," Russ said apologetically. "We're nudists." She turned to him and nearly gasped. He'd already stepped out of his swim trunks, his junk dangling in the breeze. "Oh," she said stupidly. Ellen suddenly wished she'd gone with Bill. "Nudists." "Yeah, we just like the au naturel thing in private, if you know what I mean. Does it bother you?" "Yes," she thought. "No, I'm fine. Good for you." Russ nodded knowingly. "I know, it's a shock, but come on, let's go snorkeling." Without waiting for her to respond, he put on his mask and carried his flippers into the water. Ellen blinked at him a few times before turning her gaze to Autumn. The younger woman had a bottle of suntan oil and was spreading it over her bare breasts. "You're okay with this?" "With what?" Autumn asked, glancing upward in surprise. "With—" She gestured to the water. "Me swimming with your naked husband?" She grinned. "Yes." She pointed at the black anklet on her left leg. "You know what that means?" Ellen shook her head, suddenly feeling too provincial. Autumn giggled. "We're swingers. So long as we approve of the partner, it's not a problem. So I have nothing to worry about." Ellen wasn't sure what to say to that. Swingers? Considering what she'd seen on the sundries menu in the bungalow, she shouldn't have been surprised. Was that something Green was into? She couldn't remember all the different rumors. Hell, some of them said he did experimental testing on his private islands. Internet kooks, of course, but there were so many rumors about the enigmatic man that it was impossible to believe the guy was anything more than a narcissistic, borderline sociopath with enough money to buy the country and as many politicians as he cared to. "And he signs Bill's digital checks," she thought. "You okay with that?" Autumn asked. "I'm okay with that. I mean," she blushed, "I'm okay with you being swingers." Autumn purred. "Good. Go swim. I'm trying to tan my tits." She turned back to the water, not at all surprised to see that Russ had already donned his flippers and was swimming deeper into the lagoon. Not a care in the world, she thought. Must be nice. She took a deep breath and slowly made her way into the cool water, her teeth gritting against the temperature change. She put on her flippers, lowered her mask, and swam toward the lagoon's center. Russ had chosen to swim closer to the small reef where Bill had been hurt. She wanted to tell him about the eel, but the creature could have moved anywhere by now. It might even be hiding in the field of coral she was currently swimming toward. It was doubtful one would attack her, so long as she didn't startle it. She pushed the thoughts from her mind, lowered her face into the water, and grinned. A school of pale blue fish had descended upon the small reef, their bodies tilted at an angle and their mouths scouring the coral. Their fins flipped back and forth lazily, creating a stark contrast against the tan and brown coral fingers. Not wanting to disturb them, she swam as carefully as she could above them, her flippers moving at about half speed. It took her several moments to get past it before the lagoon's depth dropped to nearly 20 feet. A dozen or so silvery fish streaked by beneath the water, heading away from the barrier. Ellen continued swimming deeper into the lagoon as the sand seemed to fall further away. Other fish streaked through the water as though their lives depended on it. Confused, she swam in the opposite direction and at a diagonal to the barrier. She crossed another large chunk of coral, marveling at the different fish supping. As she reached the barrier, she lifted her head and stared through the top of the mask. A thick mound of dead coral stared at her, a few crabs milling about in the crags and fissures. The current shifted, and she moved closer to the barrier than she liked. She kicked and used her hands to gain some distance until she reached the coral she'd just been hovering above. "You okay?" Russ called from a few feet behind her. She started and turned to him. The man trod water, kicking his legs to keep himself stationary. She forced a grin. "Lost track of where I was. Got a little too close." Russ nodded, his snorkel waving like an antenna in a high wind. "Did the same thing a little while ago." He shrugged and peered down. "The fish here are amazing. We should head a little further north. The barrier bulges outward. Might be different fish there." "Probably deeper." "True." He turned toward the shore and waved. She followed his gaze and found Angelo prowling the shoreline, a life ring in one hand. The man waved back at them. "If you don't want to go north, I'll stay here. Not a problem," Russ offered. What had Bill said? An hour or so? Maybe? She wanted to be back at the shore when he returned, but a 10-minute swim sounded good. Just exercise her legs and arms while watching the fish swim by. "Let's go a bit further," she finally said, and started swimming. She kept her arms at her sides, using only her legs to kick beneath the water. Partly submerged, she breathed through the snorkel, her face tilted downward. She watched a small stingray burrowing itself in the sand, its tan, yellow-spotted disc-like body and tail becoming all but invisible. Perfect camouflage, she thought. She'd have to remember not to put her feet on the sand without checking first. She'd warned Bill. Time she took her own advice. As she crossed another small field of coral, she caught sight of light at its far edge. Curious, she stopped swimming, dove a few feet beneath the ocean, and swam west. A glowing, glittering green moved across the edge of the coral, its body mostly hidden by the fingers. She rose, cleared her snorkel, and took a deep breath. "What is it?" she heard Russ call to her. She raised her head. "There's something down there that glows green, but I didn't see all of it." Russ pointed downward with one hand. "I think I see what you're talking about. Want to go down?" Part of her wanted to say, "Phrasing," just as she would if Bill were here. Instead, she simply nodded, took a deep breath, and surface dived. Sunbeams crashed through the water, illuminating everything, yet even at 10 feet, the light seemed to reduce drastically. As she swam down, she spied a green eldritch glow from beneath an outcrop of coral. If she hadn't had a snorkel in her mouth, it would have opened in surprise. She stared at a 1.5 foot wide crab, its carapace glowing like a light stick. The creature's chelicera were a sinister green that reminded her of toxic barrels in a video game. The thing's eye stalks waved in her direction, and it scuttled out from beneath the outcrop. With the coral no longer masking it, she saw its right claw was the size of a human child's hand. Running out of air and a little surprised, she rose but kept her snorkel above the water. The crab continued its sideways walk until it was directly beneath her. Russ floated a few feet away. He'd come up for air, too. "You ever seen anything like that?" he asked her. "No," she shook her head, "but it's beautiful." "It is at that," Russ said, grinning. He cleared his snorkel and bit down again. "Going down," he said through his teeth and dove. Ellen took a deep breath and followed. With the sun shining directly on the creature's carapace, it glittered like an eldritch disco ball, while its chelicera remained that intense, unearthly, malevolent color. It waved its large claws as if beckoning them. Ellen swam to its side and further down. The crab raised its front claw, while its smaller waved at its bulging belly. Yellow and orange eggs the size of marbles covered its ventral side, each glowing as though they were breathing, brightening and lightening in some sequence her mind barely made sense of. The crab continued to wave, and one of the eggs went dark, before brightening as though someone had turned up a bulb's wattage. Ellen managed a few more feet before the first of the eggs exploded. A dozen green streamers flew toward her through the water, and she reflexively kicked away. Her lungs began burning. She needed to get air. She turned her face away from the streamers as the first went past her, its end wriggling as though crawling through the water. The second streamer bounced off her mask and squirmed its way through her hair. She cried out in revulsion, the snorkel slipping from her teeth, salt water rushing in. A third streamer entered her half-open mouth. She kicked and rose to the surface, desperately trying to clear her mouth and avoid breathing in the water. Something slimy touched the inner flesh of her cheek and then pinched like a bear trap. She oofed and cleared her mouth, the slimy thing wriggling past her lips. Several others circled her as she broke the surface and took a deep breath of ocean air. The taste of garbage and offal filled her mouth, and she nearly vomited in disgust. She spat and spat, desperate to clear her palate. Something squirmed up her leg toward the bottom of her one piece, and she swiped it away, its texture making her spine quiver with horror. "Ow!" Russ yelled from behind her. Rather than turn to look at him, she swam as hard as she could toward the shore, putting as much distance between herself and whatever that green shit had been. She purposely allowed a few mouthfuls of salt water into her mouth and spat it out, that awful taste gradually disappearing. "What the fuck were those things?" Russ called to her. She continued swimming until her flippers hovered just above the sand. Russ swam to her, his flippers leaving many rooster tails in their wake. "I don't know," she said as he reached her. "I think one bit me." "Me too," Russ said. "Just don't ask where." She opened her mouth to do just that, remembered he was naked, and decided she didn't really want to know. "Were those crab eggs?" "No idea." Russ pointed to the shore. "Why don't we get out so Autumn can take a look at us?" She nodded gratefully and removed the flippers. Before placing her feet in the sand, she looked warily for an unnatural break or rise. Once sure she wouldn't step on a stingray, she watched from the surface onto the hot sand. Angelo appeared with 2 large towels on his arm. Ellen took one gratefully and immediately cleared out her mouth with the towel. She rubbed hard enough to excoriate the inner flesh, but it wiped away the memory of the thing's slimy touch and the awful taste. Ellen wrung out her hair, half expecting to find one of the worm-like things stuck to the base of her scalp. After turning in a half circle, she saw Russ walking up the surf, one hand holding his left testicle. "What the fuck were those things?" he asked Angelo. The man took a step back, his hand holding out the towel. Russ grabbed it from him and wiped at his privates. "I'm sorry, sir. What things?" "They were green, came out of a crab." Angelo blinked at her before turning back to Russ. "Are you injured?" "Something bit me in the balls," Russ said, a little out of breath. He moaned in pain while rubbing. "I don't know anything coming out of crabs." "What about green crabs?" Angelo looked confused. "Green crabs are everywhere here." "No, not just green," Russ said, finally getting his breathing under control. "They glowed green like neon." Angelo shook his head slowly. "I have never seen anything like that." Autumn appeared at Russ's shoulder. "What bit you?" Russ bent over at the waist and sighed. "I don't know." "Where did it get you?" He glared at her before sheepishly smiling. "My left nut." She blinked at him before stifling a chuckle and falling to her knees. Ellen didn't watch, and neither did Angelo. The two remained staring at one another, trying not to laugh. Finally, Autumn said, "I see a tiny red spot, but that's all." Russ sighed. "It really doesn't much hurt anymore. I thought a jelly had stung me. What about you?" he asked Ellen, wrapping himself in a towel. She shook her head. She didn't want to admit she'd damn near swallowed one of the things. "No bites that I know of. They just sort of freak me out." Autumn put her arm around Russ's waist. "What happened?" Ellen recounted her tale of the crab and how it waved at her before the streamers erupted from its ventral side. Angelo looked as though he wanted to say something, but didn't. "Ever heard of anything like that?" Russ asked. Angelo shook his head. "No, sir, nothing like that. I will ask the other staff members. All of us have been in the lagoon at some point for recreation. If it was there before, someone will have seen it." "I think I'm done snorkeling," Ellen said, pulling off her mask. "Me too," Russ said. He turned and walked with Autumn back to her towel and clothes. Angelo offered a hand. "I'm sorry you had a scare, Miss Ellen." She smiled. "Just Ellen, please." "May I take your mask and flippers?" She handed them to him, and he nodded his head once. "I'll take these to the rack. After we get the others settled, I'll call Nicholas." "Thank you," Ellen said. "I appreciate it." "You're very welcome, Ellen." Angelo gave a slight bow and walked quickly down the beach to the racks. She turned and looked out over the lagoon, half expecting to see the monstrous crab ascending the depths and making the water glow that peculiar green. The parasite entered Ellen's bloodstream through her cheek. It traveled through her circulatory system until it reached the ovarian vein. Once there, the parasite's ventral side extruded sharp tendrils that locked it into place. Safe and secure, the parasite consumed nutrients through the bloodstream. Instead of growing larger, it extruded tendrils that quickly traveled through the ovarian vein. The tiny creature pumped hormones into Ellen's circulatory system as its tendrils found the organs it wanted. Fairly soon, her white blood cells would begin fighting an infection that didn't exist.